Did you know that the Gardener's Workshop offers online courses? Whether you're a gardener or a flower farmer, we cover it all, allowing you to increase your skills at your own pace. So check out our full list of courses today at thegardenersworkshop.com. The Gardener's Workshop, turning all thumbs green. Hey everyone, welcome to the Field and Garden Podcast. I'm Jessie from the Gardener's Workshop. Today's episode features a takeover of our popular weekly live Q&A session over on Instagram called Ask a Flower Farmer. This one was hosted by Dave Dowling of Ball Color Link. Dave is also a former flower farmer and the instructor of our online course called Flower Farming School Online, Bulbs, Perennials, Woodies, and more. Dave is always happy to share his knowledge with our listeners, so listen in, and I hope you enjoy.
Hi everybody, welcome to Ask the Flower Farmer Live on Wednesday. It's June 26th already. Hard to believe summer is so far along. Sunflower Sky Farm, the tips are for lily leaves and the crates are turning brown. That's because they're getting too much hot sun and maybe not enough water. Make sure you're watering them enough so they never wilt. That sounds like sun damage. Heaven Sent Flower Farm in Texas 8B. They want to know if limelight hydrangeas grow well there. Yes, they will grow there, but you're going to need to give them some shade and lots of water. If you don't, they're going to get sunburn in the summer heat. But they will grow there. They're up to zone 10 or 11. You just have to have a lot of water and grow them in shade, which means on the shady side of a building or even under 50% shade cloth. Sometimes if you're in the south and you want to grow things that need shade, it's easiest just to build up a shade structure with 50% shade cloth on it. And it's amazing how many things you can grow under there. Your hydrangeas, your astilbe, polygonatum or Solomon seal, lots of other things. Bramble Bloom Farm, tips for growing fall planted campanula without a tunnel. I'm not sure where you're at, Bramble Bloom Farm. If you're talking about planting campanula, which would most likely be the Champion series, in the fall to overwinter to have flowers in the spring. If you don't have a tunnel, you're going to want to protect them if you're in zone 7 or colder. Zone 7, they should overwinter outdoors, no problem, because there's Campanula Champion, and there's also the old-fashioned Campanula Cup and Saucer Mix, which is a true biennial that has to have the cold period to bloom. The Campanula Champion does not need the cold period, but it's very helpful to overwinter them as a cool flower, because then you get much bigger and better flowers the following spring. Dorothy's Flower Gardens talking about leaf hoppers, any way to get rid of them. You're going to have to do something to kill them, either an organic spray or get a chemical spray. I don't have the spray names on the top of my tongue, so I can't tell you what. But you're going to have to spray something. That's the only way to get rid of an insect like that. Jenna wants to know tips for keeping dahlia bulbs okay over the winter season. Kept my bulbs in the basement in a paper bag and they didn't do well. Well, dahlias, when you store them, they want to be around that 40 to 49 degrees in the 40s temperature-wise. Normally in a paper bag is okay. I know a farmer in zone 7 that would store his in paper bags. He would dig them in the fall. He would not clean them. He would just shake the dirt off. He had good soil that didn't stick. It wasn't a very clay-type soil, so they came pretty clean. He would let them air dry for a couple days, then put them in paper bags, labeled the bag with the variety, and stored them in his basement, and that did pretty well. When you say yours didn't do well, did they dry out or did they get molded? That's two different problems you'll have. If they dried out, then that means your basement's low humidity and the bag should have been closed up. If they got moldy, then they weren't dry enough when they went in the bags. Vidalia Florals is suffering with vole damage to perennials like phlox. Any tips? She put down castor oil. There's the vole traps where you find the trail they're in and you put it over it and it basically kills them when they go under it. Or you're using the castor oil. There's another product called Mold Max, MOLEMAX, which is made from castor oil. It's a pelleted type feed bait that they eat and it kills them. The other thing is to get some cats and don't feed them much. I don't want to sound mean that you don't want to feed your cats, but make sure the cats are hungry and they'll become hunters and they'll get rid of all those little animals that damage your flowers. GZB Risca, what flower should we start growing in July in the tropical areas? When you say tropical, I'm assuming you're like zone 9, 10, it's never winter there. You can grow snapdragons and sunflowers year-round. Stock, you probably couldn't grow now because it's too hot in the summer. You could grow those over the wintertime. Celosia, Gomphrena, they love the hot, long days of summer. You can grow those now. But those four things, sunflowers, zinnias, celosia, Gomphrena, all love the hot summer and should have no problem growing those throughout the summer. Nicole Jenna Colette, what do you think about planting sunflowers this late in the season? I'm in zone 6B. Get yourself out there and plant those sunflowers. Yes, yes, yes. Keep planting sunflowers until 8 weeks before your first fall frost date. So if your first frost is November 1st, you stop planting September 1st. If it's October 1st, stop planting August 1st. The best way to do it is to plant them every week, and you might lose one crop to that early frost, but it's worth it to plant every week so you always have a consistent supply of sunflowers all season. So definitely, this is only the end of June, early July. Everyone should still be planting sunflowers up until the end of July, and sometimes even a little bit later if you're farther south. Harold Kim, do you know of a source for home gardeners to obtain Lizzianthus? I'm assuming she's talking plants. I did order 2 dozen from Burpee, but they did not ship until last week of April, and it was already hot there. She's zone 8A near Raleigh. Thank you. I'm going to send you to your local farmer's market. Find a flower farmer that's growing in your area and tell them you want to buy some Lizzianthus plants. Chances are they will either share some of their plugs with you or be selling small potted plants. But at your farmer's market, find a cut flower farmer, tell them you want some Lizzianthus plants, and if you're down in Raleigh, North Carolina, you should be planting them the last week of March. But yeah, just find a local flower farmer, and they're almost always willing to share some flowers with you because they're not worried that you won't come by flowers later because they know you won't pick your own usually. Melanie Mo 6. What is the ideal stage of harvest for a stilby, and how long can I keep them in the cooler before selling to florists? You want to harvest them when they're about 2/3 open, and you can keep them in the store in the cooler a week to 2 weeks. It's important to make sure you hydrate them before they go in the cooler. So harvest them first thing in the morning, give them a couple of hours in the cool shade somewhere to hydrate, and then put them in the cooler, and they'll hold for a long time. Vidalia Florals, her Lizzies are budding up on thin stems in her hoop house. Do I pinch them off or cut and hope for a second? If they're just getting buds, they're going to get taller. I had somebody yesterday that had called the office at Ball, and they deadheaded all the Lizzianthus, which would have basically ruined them. You don't want to deadhead them. You want to either let them bloom, harvest a nice tall stem, leaving a 1-inch stump that has only 1 or 2 pairs of leaves, and then you get a really nice second flush of flowers late in August and September up until frost. So never just pinch out just the upper flowers. Just let it bloom, cut the nice tall stem, leave a little short stump, and it'll grow back. But it's important to keep them watered. Plants can't grow a tall stem if they're dry and need water. And make sure they still have good fertilization. And Sloyer Melanie had the same question. Lizzianthus budding up 12 to 24 inches. Can they do anything to get longer stems? She's in zone 7A. Make sure they have enough water. And when Lizzianthus gets the buds, they're still going to grow another 4 or 5 inches before they're actually ready to harvest. So don't give up yet. SM Flow, Smo Flow. Does Ball sell to small-scale home gardeners? No, we don't sell to home gardeners. We only sell to farmers or businesses that plant our product and then resell it later as either a cut flower, or a lot of our customers are garden centers that sell potted plants, annuals and perennials. So we don't sell to the home gardeners. You have to have a business where you're reselling. But like I mentioned earlier, check your local farmers market for flower farmers there. And they're usually, a lot of them already sell plants in the spring that are cut flower varieties, or ask them if they can share some with you. Melanie is asking here, can I or should I pinch Dusty Miller? She picked up some at the garden center to fill in some holes and they're a bit leggy. The Dusty Miller, when you're going as a cut stem, you want to plant them really close together, like every 5 or 6 inches. If they're wide apart, they can get bushy. If they're leggy, you could pinch them, they'll branch back out and grow some more. But leggy with a cut flower is actually good for a cut stem. So let them get taller, cut that stem, and then it should branch out and give you a second flush later on. And remember that Dusty Miller is a biennial. It's going to come back next year and be bigger and better in the spring. Will flower in July and August, and then it's finished. And Bashu, how do you store dahlias over the winter? Oh, there's as many ways to store dahlias as there is, anything. Lots of ways. I know one grower that would store them in the big watermelon pallets that you can see at the grocery store full of watermelons, where he would pack the dahlias in there with peat moss and then put them in his cooler at 38 degrees. I know another grower that would put them in paper bags for the winter. I know someone that divides them in the fall, wraps every individual tuber in saran wrap so they don't dehydrate, then puts them in the cold storage in her basement where it's 45 to 55 degrees. A lot of people in zones 6B and warmer are now just leaving them in the ground over the winter, mulching it really good, maybe putting a piece of clear plastic over that so it keeps it dry, which keeps them from rotting, and the sun also keeps a little bit warmer. You can overwinter them in the soil like that for a couple years, but then you eventually need to dig and divide them because they get too crowded. Some people dig them up and store them in the big plastic Tupperware type containers in their basement. The biggest thing, you're trying to keep them from dehydrating, so you don't want them to dry out. And that's where either the peat moss or putting them in a plastic container help comes in. And then the temperature, you want to keep them in the around 40 to 50 degrees over the winter to store them. But you got to make sure they're clean when you put them away. And I don't mean clean with no dirt. I mean clean with no mold or mildew or disease on them. So most people will dig them. You leave them out in the sun or somewhere for a couple days to dry really good. Think of like a potato. When you first dig it, it's got a really thin skin that damages easy. They store them and let them dry for a few days before they actually go into storage or they bag them, and the skin toughens up. You're trying to do the same thing with your dahlias, because dahlias are basically a tuber just like a potato. I'm planting sunflowers every week. My question was, do you think after planting straw flowers this late in the season? Okay, so Jana Colette, is planting sunflowers every week, which is great. As you all probably heard, Lisa Ziegler bought a tractor one year, paid for the tractor by planting sunflowers every week consistently and selling them to her florist customers. So that's a real great thing to do, plant your sunflowers every week. Asking, is it too late to be planting straw flowers now? If you get them started like is in today or tomorrow, you'll probably be okay. They'll be blooming in mid-September. And straw flowers can take a light frost, so it's usually a hard freeze before they're finished. They don't grow much once we start to get in the cold weather in mid-October, but it takes a hard freeze to kill them rather than a frost. Adriana wants to know, what's the best method for propagating peonies, seeds or cuttings? They're actually done by divisions. They dig them up, an established plant, and then cut them up in pieces, leaving 2 or 3 sprouts or eyes on every plant, sometimes as many as 5, and replant that root. You can do that anytime when the plant is dormant, so you can dig up your peonies in October through March, divide them, let the cuts dry for a few hours or a day, so you don't have the fleshy surface showing, and then replant them right away. New varieties are produced or discovered from seeds, where breeders will take the 2 different varieties and cross-pollinate this plant to get seeds. Then they plant the seeds. It might be 5 or 6 years before they find a new variety, then another 5 or 6 years before it can make enough of that variety to sell them. So that's why there's not a lot of new peonies coming on the market, just because the time from trying to start a new variety to when it's actually available to sell is about 10 years. But there are so many great peony varieties, some that have been around for 100 years. Ones like Sarah Bernhardt, still one of the best varieties you can grow. So you can't do much better than that. So you don't necessarily want new varieties, you just want good varieties when you're growing cut flowers. But peonies are grown by division. Connie is in zone 6B. She's 111 days until her first expected frost. Can she start group 2 snapdragons now for fall blooms? How do people do it to have fall snaps? Yes, definitely. Snapdragons are about 12 weeks after planting them out. 12 weeks is only 86 days or whatever that is. So yes, you can definitely start group 2 snapdragons, which are for fall or spring. So do group 2 snapdragons starting anytime in late June to mid to late July. So you get the plant transplanted out by the last week of July, and you have flowers by the end, mid to late October, which is perfect. Or even late September, they'll be ready. So yeah, you still definitely have time to grow group 2 snapdragons if you get them started in the next week or so. Andre Bilbray wants to know about any sprays to treat bugs for dahlias and recommendations for fertilization once they're blooming. Sprays as far as insects, you need to know what your insect is. If you're treating for thrips, it's very different than treating for aphids or spider mites. If you have spider mites, it has to be a miticide that kills it. I don't really like to give out names of items without actually doing a little research for different sprays. There's some sprays that will kill everything, including the good bugs, and you usually don't want to spray with something like that. Sometimes if all you have is bad aphid infestation, you can just hose them off and the aphids are gone. So it all depends on what type of bug you have. If you're not sure what kind of insect you had, If you do Google search for dahlia insects, it'll come up with pictures so you know what kind of insect you're dealing with. And you can also then usually find the right treatment, whether in an organic spray or no spray, something just water to wash them away, or if you have to, if you want to use a chemical spray that will take care of that insect. Because nowadays a lot of the chemical sprays are very targeted and they only treat 1 or 2 insects. Now there's an insect that kills aphids, may not do anything to thrips. And they've done that over the years so that the sprays aren't damaging the good insects, the pollinators. It really just targets the insect you're having a problem with. Slavic Sourdough wants to know, why are the stems from box store seeds way shorter than advertised on the package? I'm not sure what kind of crop you're growing. Are you talking zinnias, solosias? It could be that it's just the package is not labeled right. Sometimes they don't have the, I don't want to say the wrong person, but somebody who doesn't know the plants very well doing the ad copy on the package. They're trying to make a sale and sell those seeds and may not always have the correct information. But if they're short, it could be lack of water. I say that all the time. I sent an email out about a week ago reminding people in this hot weather, water your plants, sometimes every day, 24 hours a day, because without enough water, your plants are not going to grow. So that could be why they're not as tall as advertised in the package, because they're not getting enough water. Are they getting enough light? If it's a full sun plant, it needs to be in full sun. And also spacing makes a big difference. If you take a Benari's giant zinnia that's supposed to get 3.5 feet tall and plant just one of them, it's going to be short and bushy and round. If you plant them 8 to 10 inches apart, it's going to grow to be that 3.5 to 4 feet tall. But if it has a lot of room beside it to grow wide, sometimes plants grow wide before they grow tall. Skyflower or Sunflower Sky Farm. She has botrytis on her peonies this year. Dry climate in Colorado, on landscape fabric. She did mulch the holes to keep her invasive, keep out the grass. How can she prevent botrytis again next year? Well, those botrytis spores are in your landscape. They're in the land, they're in the soil, they're on the fabric now, they're everywhere. So what you want to do is next spring, well, first of all, this fall, clean everything up. Get all the old plants cut and removed off the farm or away from the peony patch. You can put them in a compost pile, but I never like to put diseased plants in a compost pile. They should go in the dumpster or the burn pile to get rid of that, because the spores are still there waiting to overwinter and come back next year and get your plants. But then next spring, the minute you see those peonies start to break the surface, you should be spraying with a fungicide every week to 10 days until the peonies have buds showing. And when I say spray the plant, I want you to spray the fabric and the grass and weeds or ground or whatever you have around the fabric, because those spores are there waiting for those peonies to come back next year so they can come and attack it. So you want to make sure that you start treating as soon as you see the plants come up in the spring, and they're treat every week to 10 days, following the label and the fungicide until they have buds showing. And that should really help clear it up. You only need to spray the fabric and the surrounding area one time really good. You don't have to keep spraying that area, but the plants you want to spray every week to 10 days. Follow the instructions on the label of the fungicide. And most fungicides, you're only supposed to use that specific one for 2 or 3 times before you rotate to a different one. So read your label on the fungicide. A copper-based one is always good and works well for the botrytis on peonies. Fiona says, I remember you saying you had a friend in Texas who grows thousands of ranunculus. Can you share their pre-sprouting technique? I remember you said something about them not using any soil substrate. Yeah, what they do is they soak the ranunculus in water for 4 to 6 hours till they're puffed up. You'll see the difference. They just look bigger and puffy and plump versus the dried ones you get. Then they let them drip dry, or not drip dry, but let them get the water out of the bag. They're in mesh bags. They put them in the cooler, and in about 2 weeks at about 40 to 45 degrees, they have little sprouts, and then they plant them. So they don't do them any soil or anything. They just let them sprout right in the bag. But you got to watch it. You don't want them to be sprouted to a point where you're going to break the sprouts and break the roots when you're trying to take them out and plant them. So you got to be ready to plant them as soon as they have little sprouts started. And it can be as little as just one little teeny sprout at the top of the plant with a new root coming out. You don't necessarily need to have leaves showing or anything like that. As long as you know that individual corm is viable and growing, it's time to plant it. And then make sure you keep them watered once they're in there and growing. Little West 64, any advice on starting and growing Calibra Italian poppy seed? They're tricky. They don't like it hot. My suggestion would be to Google Calibri poppy culture information on Google, and it'll tell you the actual temperature it needs and whether you need to pre-chill the seeds. I know that Grow and Sell, who grows a lot of poppy plugs, will not start them in the summer. They won't even start the seed until September because it's too warm and they can't get a place cool enough to grow them. So don't try and do it when the weather's really hot. They need a cool environment to start. Nicole Gillette says she's just starting to cut, or Lizzianthus just budding up and afraid she's going to hurt them when she cuts them. Lizzianthus will have that first bloom is going to bloom. You don't want to pick it yet. Wait till some of the surrounding blooms are really colored up and about just to start open, then you can start to harvest. Some people will deadhead that individual little central bloom that's first to bloom. I always left it on there usually because it's still good when you're picking it when the other 4 or 5 that are around it are ready. So wait till you have 3 or 4 blooms on the stem open and then you pick it. What's the best spacing for chamomile? Mine are 6 inches apart and stems are really short. That's about the right spacing. I'd have to ask, are they new plants you just planted? If they're new plants, they may not get tall till the next year because chamomile usually ends up being an invasive, reseeding everywhere and sometimes troublesome. But 6-inch spacing should be right. Make sure they're getting enough water. If they're young plants, give them time, they will get taller. And Vandalia Florals wants to know my best harvest tips for Sahara Rebecca. Any of the Rebecca can be tricky. Number 1, make sure the plant is watered really well before you harvest. You can't harvest a wilty flower and then expect it to hydrate and be good. So make sure the plant's watered really well the day before and then harvest first thing in the morning. You want a flower that's fairly open. You don't want it like a sunflower, just one little petal sticking up. You want to be fairly open to even all the way fully open, but make sure it's a fully open, freshly opened, not when it's been open for 3 or 4 days on the plant. And you can tell that by looking at the central cone on the Rebecca. That's going to be the seed pod. And if that is flat and low with like a little dimple in the middle, it's a fresh flower. If that looks cone-shaped and the dimple's gone, then you've got a flower that's been blooming on the plant for 3 or 4 days, maybe even longer, and that's not a good cut flower. Caffitz wants to know, she's in zone 7, is it too late to start celosia plume seeds indoors? You can still do the plume now. You can almost do this outdoors if you have some weed-free soil to do it in. If you start them indoors, they're ready to transplant out in about 3 weeks. But yes, you can still do those now. They'll be starting to bloom in September. About the only celosia I wouldn't plant now would be Kramer's Amazon, because that takes a long time to start blooming and you wouldn't make it in time. Smofo had white flies last year. I'm not sure what they were on. What's the best way to get rid of these? She's worried they'll come again. White flies, you're going to sticky cards, the yellow sticky cards, the sticky tape works great to trap those because they get on there and then it catches them. I don't know if you're talking in a tunnel or greenhouse or out in the open field. White flies are usually not a problem outdoors. They usually just go away on their own by regular predators get them. But yeah, I would use the sticky cards if you're indoors. Is it too late to start straw flowers and status? I would do the straw flowers, yes. It's a little late for status. And status does not like a hot start, and it's really hot out now. When harvesting lemon verbena for floral bouquets, could you give tips on long vase life? Like I said earlier, the best tip is water that plant before you harvest. So water really good the day before. Harvest first thing in the morning. Make sure you're harvesting stems that are older, and you should be fine. What I like to do on plants like that is sometimes you get a few stems that wilt, something like the lemon verbena or the mahogany splendor hibiscus. Harvest it, put it in the shade to let it hydrate for a couple hours, then put it in the cooler, and then the next morning pull out any stems that went bad. And if they've survived that first overnight in the cooler, they should last in the vase, no problem. Cecile Flower Farm wants to know what kind of direct sow now for fall bloom. Sunflowers, zinnias, cosmos. You wouldn't direct snapdragons, but you can still do snapdragons. You wouldn't direct sow stock, but you can plant stock, start it in early August for fall blooms. Find Us Faithful, looks like her straw flowers droop even when I place them right into water, then in the cooler. She's cutting them first thing in the morning. Again, make sure the plant's really well watered the night before. If you're still having them droop after you harvest them, wrap them in paper, put them in the shade for a couple hours to hydrate, and then put them in the cooler. And having that paper holding the flower stems upright while it's hydrating can really make a difference. Jenny Schneider's in zone 10B, so you can't grow peonies. I'm really sorry for that. I can't imagine living where you can't grow peonies. But is there another perennial that I would recommend that might work similarly but do in a warmer area? That's the trick. You're not going to have anything that has the big flowers like that other than growing dahlias. You can grow dahlias probably year-round in zone 10, but you have to give them a lot of water. Summertime, every day, they need to be watered. And shade cloth wouldn't hurt. But other things like you could grow phlox, the perennial phlox paniculata. It has a nice big flower, blooms for you probably in late June. I have some right now that's blooming here in zone 8 that looks great. But phlox would be then. Other than that, there's nothing really that's the same as a peony. There's no such thing as a substitute. Heaven Sent Farm in 8B, Texas. I purchased Amanine ranunculus from Ball for fall shipping. Should I treat this as an annual in Texas, or may I leave them in the ground as a perennial? If you leave them in the ground, they will come back in the fall again. In other words, you're going to harvest them probably down in Texas in March and April. They will go dormant with the heat of the summer, probably be totally dead and gone by mid-May. You can leave them in the ground, and then when the weather is right and the soil temperature is correct, they'll sprout again in the fall. The only thing that does is it ties up that bed space throughout the summer. Unless you can grow something over it, that's a very small root mass. Something like a soloa, you would never put a sunflower over it, or a zinnia, because the roots are too big and they would interfere. But if you wanted to plant something between it, a single stem soloa planting between the anemone plants, you could do that. Between the Amanine ranunculus plants, you could plant a soloa between them. But if you leave them in the ground, they will end up being a perennial in Texas. Just want to remind everybody that I do this online class with the Gardener's Workshop. It's called Bulbs, Perennials, Woodies, and More. It's all about growing bulb crops, woodies, and perennials for cut flowers. And the more is a little bit where we talk about structures, growing high tunnels, greenhouses, and shade structures, just brushing the surface on that. If you're really interested in growing a lot of stuff in tunnels and greenhouses, the class with Steve and Gretel at Sunny Meadows Farm is the one for you for that. So we're all good. And Lisa or someone else will be back here every Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern to answer your cut flower questions. Have a great week, everybody.